We've been talking about women in combat and Leon Panetta's order that came yesterday. And just this is what we know from it. The Wall Street Journal has said that the defense officials say they don't really expect the change to result in women being allowed to serve as infantry troops, but that women will be able to volunteer if they want to and possibly be placed in some smaller ground combat units. But at the same time, the military has until 2016 to request an exemption if they want to keep their specific area designated to just male roles only. So it kind of makes me wonder, well, what is going to be changed in that? And plus, what do women think about women being on the front line as well? I've heard what men think, but what do women think about women being on the front line? Joining me right now is Stacey Washington and Virginia Kruta. Both of them have served. Stacey was in the Air Force. Jenny Kruta was in the Army. Well, we'll start with Stacey. What do you think about this, Stacey?
I'm against it. I always have been, and as an active duty service woman, now I'm a veteran, I understand what combat is, and I think the real problem here is that we keep talking about women in combat. We're thinking of that movie with Demi Moore where she just kicks the daylights out of every man she comes into combat with because she's just that tough. And the reality is that training scenarios never match the true brutality of war. And women in combat changes the entire atmosphere and camaraderie that exists in a military unit. And so we need to be very careful before we take a huge step like this, which also opens the door to women being drafted.
Yeah.
But I'm against it. And I think people look at, oh, Stacey, you're a girl, you just don't want to go to combat. Well, you're damn right. I don't want to go to combat. I don't want my daughters going to combat because I know what it really is. I sat with my father as an adult and talked about his time in the Vietnam War. And it's not what you see on TV.
Exactly. It seems that everyone thinks that women are all like Lara Croft or G.I. Jane. And that's, sure, there are some exceptions to the rule, but it seems as it's not necessarily the rule because you have those examples. Now, Jenny Kruta served in the Army. What do you think about women in combat and Leon Panetta's role here?
Well, I would agree with Stacey, first of all, that it's a bad idea to lift the ban. And this is not to say that I don't think women have a place in the military. Obviously, I was there for 10 years. Stacey spent I don't know how many years. But there are definite roles for women in the military. But in a combat situation, as Stacey said, it's different than training. And the reality is, yes, there are women who can handle combat. There are. There are also men who can't. But do we make the rule based on the exception, or do we look at exceptions as what they are?
Exactly.
But the other thing is that for him to make this statement, it doesn't look like it's going to change much now. It really doesn't. But moves like this are usually progressive. So right now it's a foot in the door, and yes, women can join units if they want to volunteer, et cetera, et cetera. But if you allow them to do that, the next thing is a push to bring the percentage of women in combat units up to to equal the percentage of women serving in the military as a whole. And what happens when you have the difference in physical training standards that Kevin mentioned earlier, and now you have 20% of your fighting force in combat that is not expected to perform at the level of the other 80%?
Yeah, that's a big number, too. And Stacey, you, both of you ladies have gone through training, and you didn't have the same standards. You didn't have to hold the same standards as men throughout training.
No.
Oh, I mean, no way. Absolutely not. And I was so physically fit when I went into the Air Force. I mean, I breezed through basic training. I was shocked that I was able to do what they asked me to do, but I spent 9 months beforehand lifting weights and building up my muscle mass to prepare to join the Air Force. And that's after my father told me, you're going to join the Air Force, not the Army, because the Army conditions, the living conditions, the conditions they expect you to work under, and the combat conditions are far too aggressive for anything I would want you to go through. Now, that being said, obviously, I would still be a woman there. So imagine if I'd been a man. Well, they expect men to do different things, different body mass, and this is all based on science. People think that it's all, they're being sexist. They don't want to be around women. Bull crap. They're going by scientific analysis of the human body and what a man is made up of and what a woman is made up of.
Exactly. And that's the same thing with you, Jenny. I mean, that's something that you noticed going through training, and you went through the Army.
Yep, I did. And I went through in 1999 where it was arguably tougher than it is now. So there is that. But, I think, and you were talking about, is this a political move, or is this something that's political? Or is it political correctness, or is this a move to make the Army stronger? And I think that in general, the military remains strong because it is discriminatory. This is one of the only jobs in the United States where you can be kept out, fired, or barred from promotion because you're too tall, too short, too thin, too fat, too sick, too stupid. I mean, all of those things, and it goes on. Every move the military has made in the direction of political correctness has been a move away from strategic strength.
Exactly. So that sort of makes me wonder, leads me to the thought that perhaps this is more so on political correctness, because everything that I've seen, this demand isn't actually coming from women who are in the military, who have served or who are active duty. Stacey, have you heard women with whom you've served talked about how, they need to be on the front lines and it's unfair?
Are you kidding me? Okay, so let's keep it real. These are real people. So I was on active duty. Arguably, this is, years before Ginny was, but I'm still a pretty young chick. I think it still applies. I remember there being discussions about combat pay and hazard pay, and we would laugh. We would sit in our dorm and laugh because we felt like they were totally underpaid for what they had to go through. When they would come back from a war, a theater of war, they would always say, oh, this is what we had to live through. This is what we had to go through. And I would always say, that was the first one to pipe up with the catty comment, they're not paying you enough for that crap. I'm glad I don't have to go out there and do that. And they'd say, yeah, you would never survive that. I mean, the things they described aren't fit for radio. There's an article on the Wall Street Journal right now where a former Marine, who's now an attorney, describes how they had to use the bathroom, how many of them were packed into an artillery carrier where they had to be in there for 48 hours, how they never got to wash. And if you just take your mental acuity and extrapolate that out, just think about what they're talking about doing in front of each other, that they had no choice but to have their bodily functions in the same immediate space as each other. Without cleaning themselves, just imagine that and mix in a few women. I think what we're looking at is it's more political correctness run amok, but beyond that, it is first we allow the gays into the military openly. We start marrying them in churches and start infringing upon political rights or religious rights. Then we say women are the same as men. Women have to serve in combat units, and we completely desexualize and the discrimination that Ginny so perfectly described that makes the military the supreme fighting force on the face of this planet. That is obliterated. And then it just goes along with Obama's plan of weakening America. I mean, it's insidious, and it's the wrong thing to do.
And Ginny, too, you're talking about the physical differences and so on and so forth. It isn't, and plus the individualism that we keep hearing preached about the military and so on. Like, I said earlier, no one cares what you believe, what music you listen to, who you like. Can you be part of a military unit? Everything else seems to be kind of going against that goal of training and developing people to work as a team. And with this as well, it makes me wonder if folks who are serving, if they would perhaps feel less safe when they're out on their missions, knowing that they have people out there who were subjected to lower standards than their male counterparts. And again, there's always exceptions to the rule, but as you said, should we be making these policies based on the exception or the rule?
Right. Well, and that's, everybody's been in a unit with the one guy who can't pull his own weight, from training on up to wherever you serve. And, for me, I worked in a hospital. But, if you have somebody drop the ball in a hospital, people get hurt, people die. And you all know which guy you don't want to be serving with, whether you're in combat or you're in garrison, wherever you happen to be. There's always going to be that one.
Right.
And if you know that now instead of 20% of your unit is not going to live up to the standard that you need, it's just that much worse. So
whenever you ladies hear that, we're so glad that there's this equality now, that they're making this move towards equality. Stacey, when you hear those remarks about this particular order coming from Panetta, what do you make of that? What's your response to that?
My unvarnished response is, spare me your equal crap. It sounds like an equal serving of crap, not just for me, but for all Americans to have our standards lessened for our military, which decreases our safety, but it's also every time I hear the word equal now, I start feeling a headache coming from my left, and my right side wants to go paralyzed. It's ridiculous. The effect that being equal is having on our society, and I'm saying that as a black person. This isn't about equal treatment. This is about people who can and cannot perform a specific task that's central to the military's mission, which is the Air Force maintain air and space superiority. The military is taking the ground, and waging war and hand-to-hand combat in all different forms. It's you have a job to do. Can you do the job or not? So I think, one good thing for Leon Panetta is he's making decisions that don't affect him personally because he's not on active duty anymore as a person on the ground. He's in management, so he doesn't have to worry about 20% of his unit being unable to perform the tasks that they've been given. And that's lucky for him, not so lucky for our active duty members.
Yeah. And what do you make of that, Jenny, when you hear people say, oh, well, this is, finally the glass ceiling in the military is being shattered, as though that's something that's the purpose of the military is testing ground for societal equality.
Well, it actually, and I think I mentioned to you this to you earlier, it reminds me of 2001 when General Shinseki was kind of in charge and he made changes to the uniform. He said, okay, as of June 14th, 2001, all soldiers are going to wear the black beret, which instead of the old patrol cap that looks like the typical Army baseball cap that you guys are familiar with, which they have actually gone back to since. Now, the beret might look dressier. It's pretty. It looks nice with the uniform, but it serves absolutely no practical purpose. And we used to complain about it. It doesn't block the sun. It doesn't block the rain. It blows off your head if it's windy. But, we complained about it, but the people who really deserved to complain were the ones who had actually earned that beret. They took the black beret from the Army Rangers and gave it to everybody. So, these guys have sacrificed to earn those berets, and they've been marginalized by an army that now gives it to everyone who simply exists. It's very similar to what you have with these combat units, these, especially in most cases, these very elite combat units,
right,
where the men meet such strenuous qualifications. They're minimized and mocked by the women who can do half the work and get all of the recognition and the pay.
Yeah, and that's it, and that's the thing. Well, we'll learn more about these orders because they've been leaked, so we don't. I mean, the way that we know it doesn't really seem to have that much of an impact. But as Jenny said, it's progressive. Stacy Washington, Stacy on the right on Twitter, Jenny Kruta, VA Kruta on Twitter. Thank you, ladies, both so much for your service and for coming on this afternoon. We'll talk to you again in the future. Thanks.
Thank
Take
you.
care.